Mr. Trump's controversial chief strategist forced out after a short and stormy tenure at the White House.
We've just learned that Stephen Bannon, the chief strategist for President Trump, has resigned. Now, Bannon was a controversial figure from the get-go. He had been with President Trump for a year, first joined him on the campaign as the chief executive. Before that, he was a conservative media provocateur. But many people credit Steve Bannon with shaping President Trump's message of populism, America first, and nationalism. He was no doubt controversial from the moment he entered the campaign, partly because of his work with Breitbart.
Can you tell us how you're feeling about your chief strategist, Mr. Bannon?
Steve Bannon is
I never spoke to Mr. Bannon about it.
Tell us broadly what do you still have confidence in
Well,
Steve?
we'll see. Hey, look. I like Mr. Bannon. He's a friend of mine. But Mr. Bannon came on very late. You know that. I went through 17 senators, governors, and I won all the primaries. Mr. Bannon came on very much later than that. And I like him. He's a good man. He is not a racist, I can tell you that. He's a good person. He actually gets a very unfair press in that regard. But we'll see what happens with Mr. Bannon, but he's a good person, and I think the press treats him, frankly, very unfairly.
What may have been the last straw for Bannon, a controversial interview the former Breitbart news executive gave to the liberal publication American Prospect.
White House chief strategist Steve Bannon said, according to the American Prospect, that there is no military solution in North Korea, adding, quote, "They got us."
U.S. prefers a diplomatic solution to the crisis in North Korea, but you said that diplomatic and economic efforts and pressure were, quote, backed by a credible military option. In recent days, the White House strategist Steve Bannon called the diplomatic and economic ratcheting up of tensions with North Korea a, quote, sideshow. He said that there was no military solution and that the real issue is an economic war with China. Does this reflect some kind of new opinion by the administration, or was he speaking for himself? And are you afraid that comments like this might dilute the credible military deterrent that is backing your diplomatic and economic efforts? Thank you.
I don't really have a comment on what Mr. Bannon's remarks were in that particular interview. I read those. I think we have been quite clear as to what the policy and the posture towards North Korea is. And I think Secretary Mattis and I, in that op-ed, wanted to inform, as best we were able to do, inform the American people first, but also inform our important friends and allies as to what our approach is. And our approach has been endorsed by the President. It is reviewed with him periodically in terms of the status of how the approach is working. And it is first and foremost, as you have seen, to undertake a very concerted, deliberate campaign of exerting pressure on the regime in North Korea to an extent that is best we can tell. And we did study previous attempts over the past 2 decades. What's different about this campaign is I think the level of international unity around this campaign, the level of cooperation we are getting from China and from others in the region, and the intensity with which we are carrying out the campaign. Obviously, any diplomatic effort in any situation where you have this level of threat that we're confronted with, a threat of proportions that none of us like to contemplate, has to be backed by a strong military consequence if North Korea chooses wrongly. And I think that is the message that the President has wanted to send to the leadership of North Korea. And it was really in response to this ever-escalating levels of threat and rhetoric that were coming from the regime in Pyongyang. And you've heard the words, you've seen the videos that they have produced. I think the President just felt it was necessary to remind the regime of what the consequences for them would be if they chose to carry out those threats. We are prepared. We're prepared militarily. We're prepared with our allies to respond if that is necessary. That is not our preferred pathway, and that's been made clear as well. So we continue our full-out efforts, working with partners, working with allies, to bring that pressure on the regime in North Korea with a view that at some point with a unified international message like we've never had before, they will realize the level of isolation they find themselves in, and that the future that they will face with that level of isolation is bleak, and will only become bleaker if they continue this pathway. So that is our effort, is to cause them to want to engage in talks, but engage in talks with an understanding that these talks will lead to a different conclusion than talks of the past.
Undermining the president's North Korea strategy, saying there's no military option to deal with the threat. The official White House statement cited the tough new White House Chief of Staff John Kelly, who has been trying to restore order to the West Wing. John Kelly and Steve Bannon have mutually agreed today would be Steve's last day. We're grateful for his service and wish him the best.
Let me emphasize that word, global. As Secretary of State Tillerson rightly said after North Korea's ICBM launch, global action is required to stop a global threat. The alarming behavior exhibited by the Kim Jong-un regime is not just a threat to our friends in South Korea, it's a threat to Japan, it's a threat to China, it's a threat to Russia, it's a threat to U.S. allies in the Philippines, Australia, and Thailand, and it's a threat to the United States. It's a threat to the entire world because North Korea's missiles point in every direction. And it's the reason that we call for all nations to implement far stronger economic sanctions against Pyongyang. Kim Jong-un is on a quest for nuclear weapons on the one hand and the means to deliver them intercontinentally on the other. Separate capabilities where he continues to make substantial progress. As the world saw on July 4th, North Korea now has an intercontinental ballistic missile capability. That means North Korean missiles have the range to reach North Korea, have the range to reach North America and Hawaii.
Ready, talk!
Came out about 7, 8 o'clock, and the Japanese already had the whole range set up, and then moved out. We're engaging multiple targets at various ranges, all the way out to 560 meters. And then the Japanese took their turn on the range. This isn't the first time we've worked with this group. We've been training with them all week, and they're very professional, and they're super curious about how we do things. They've got a couple of hints and tricks that we didn't think of. They're a great time.
And because he isn't afraid to fail in public, North Korean capability will continue to improve. So we must study and consider every possible step to increase the defense of our homelands with the best and most effective solutions possible. Additionally, Japan and South Korea and the United States are vigorously pursuing economic and diplomatic pressures aimed at persuading Pyongyang to give up its nuclear arms program. So at PACOM, we're doing our best to back up these preferred diplomatic options with credible combat power. That's why we deploy carrier strike groups with Aegis ships and the world's best submarines to Northeast Asia. That's why we maintain a formidable continuous bomber presence in the region. And that's why we continue our ironclad defense of Japan, to include deploying our newest and best military platforms like the F-35 Joint Strike Fighter, the P-8 Poseidon, and the MV-22 Osprey. And that's why I continue to emphasize multinational collaboration against a North Korean threat that endangers all of our nations. This includes increasing trilateral cooperation with the U.S., Japan, and South Korea, a partnership with a purpose if there ever was one. Our three countries share so much in common: democracy, free markets, a commitment to human rights, and we share common security threats. United, we're stronger, and I believe there is much that we can achieve with close cooperation. I also firmly believe that every nation who considers itself to be a responsible contributor to international security must work diplomatically and economically to bring Kim Jong-un to his senses and not to his knees.